Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're totally dismantling that rigid, black and white way we usually think about objective truth. We're going to unpack some incredibly thought-provoking source material centered around a concept called a thorn in philosophy. It's a fascinating look at how we reason, so let's just dive right in.
So, right off the bat, we have to ask, does pure objectivity actually exist? People are constantly demanding perfect, unblemished objectivity in reasoning. They'll point at a solid argument and just entirely dismiss it by saying, well, that's just subjective. We have this super naive demand for an impossible level of perfection. But as we're going to see, demanding pure objectivity, it's actually a massive trap.
All right, let's jump straight into Section 1, the illusion of perfect objectivity.
There's a pretty wild irony in how we process information. On one hand, a thinker might fiercely demand absolute, flawless objectivity in a philosophical debate. Yet, on the other hand, this exact same person usually has no problem fully accepting the results of modern science. But here's the catch. Science, at its very core, is fundamentally probabilistic. It's crazy how we compartmentalize our logic, right? It's fascinatingly contradictory that we readily accept scientific findings based entirely on probabilities, but then suddenly turn around and demand absolute perfection the second we start philosophizing.
The reality is, forcing rigid consistency can actually destroy the foundation of absolute perfection. If you push way too hard for an unrealistic, perfect objectivity, the entire logical structure you've built literally collapses under its own weight. Why? Because the pursuit of that absolute perfection requires a level of strict consistency that our messy, complex reality just doesn't support. You end up chasing a ghost, and your whole chain of reasoning completely breaks down.
Moving right along to Section 2, the deceptive limits of freedom.
Let's consider the naive thinker versus the realistic thinker. The naive thinker truly believes they can be completely free of subjectivity, like they've somehow magically escaped all their personal biases and reached this pure, objective mountaintop. But the realistic thinker understands something absolutely crucial. We don't actually escape limitations. We simply swap out one set of limitations for another one that happens to suit us a bit better. We adopt a new subjectivity, and then we mistakenly label it as objective simply because, we prefer it. Because true freedom actually means being free within bounded limits. Think about physical freedom for a second. You're completely free to move around, but you're still bound by the walls of the room you're in, or, the laws of gravity. You can't just sprint into a brick wall and claim you're free of it. And that exact same rule applies to objective reasoning. We exist within a bounded, limited reality. Thinking you can achieve absolute objectivity is honestly like thinking you can walk through a concrete wall just because you declared yourself free.
Okay, Section 3, redefining the meaning of objective. This brings us to a real game changer. What we so confidently label as objective is in reality just subjectivity shared across communities. I really want you to let that sink in for a second. True objectivity isn't some universal law handed down from the cosmos. In practice, it's just an agreement among a group of people, or a community, that a certain subjective view is the accepted baseline. And because of that shared nature, every single dimension of truth contains multiple interconnected sides: subjective, objective, absolute, and relative. They're all completely tangled together. Truth is absolutely not a flat line. Think of it more like a four-dimensional puzzle. When you step out of a purely subjective view, you aren't leaving the dimension of truth behind. You're really just shifting your context among these four coordinates. You haven't escaped subjectivity. You've just, moved to a different spot on the map.
Which leads us perfectly into Section 4, why AI robots struggle.
Our source material points out a highly relevant observation for today's world. Even at this point, robots struggle to understand it, balancing the subjective with the objective, and really grasping the concrete hierarchy of reality. This is not as simple as counting 1, 2, 3. It requires serious, nuanced human effort. Right now, AI is completely overwhelmed by this level of grounded, philosophical reasoning. Navigating these bounded limits of truth is a uniquely human capacity.
Ultimately, AI is a reminder tool. It's not a primary reasoning engine. Because artificial intelligence lacks the ability to grasp the complex, concrete hierarchy behind what is subjective and what is objective, it cannot truly reason. This is exactly why you can't just plug a deep moral dilemma into a language model and expect an airtight, perfectly objective answer. I mean, it can organize data, sure, and it can remind us of facts, but you absolutely cannot rely on a robot to do your heavy philosophical lifting. True reasoning requires an understanding of human context that algorithms literally just do not possess.
Let's head into our final part, Section 5, Avoiding Abstract Logic Thorns.
So, what are these logic thorns that repeatedly cause well-meaning truth seekers to stumble? First up is unrecognized subjectivity. That's thinking you're completely unbiased when you definitely aren't. Then there's misunderstood relativity, the trap of thinking everything is equally meaningless. And finally, false objectivity, which is just labeling your preferred bias as absolute truth. This is a highly critical zone, folks. It's a landscape filled with traps where champions of truth fall down over and over again simply because they oversimplify these incredibly complex concepts.
So, how do we actually navigate these thorns without getting stuck? Well, step 1 is the critical observation of our own self-deception. Before we do literally anything else, we have to look inward and observe how we might have tricked ourselves. And step 2 is critical validation before accusing others. Way too often, we rush to point the finger and accuse someone else of a major error in logic, completely unaware that we ourselves are already tangled up in the thorns of our own unrecognized subjectivity.
So we're essentially faced with two paths here. You can try to build complex rules on fragile, abstract foundations, but if your base completely ignores the messy reality of how subjectivity and objectivity intertwine, your philosophy is fragile and, honestly, it's going to shatter. Instead, we have to build like a pyramid, grounding our philosophy in a concrete hierarchy. This requires acknowledging that human perception is actually part of the equation, not some glitch to be completely eradicated. You just cannot draw a hard line, declare this is subjective, that is objective, and magically forget the complex reality that binds the whole shebang together.
All of this leaves us with a final, lingering question. Is your philosophy no longer just abstract? Are you actually doing the work to make it realistic so you can truly reason with what is subjective and objective? Don't let your reasoning just float away into pure abstraction. Keep it grounded. Recognize the boundaries of your own logic, and seriously, watch out for those thorns. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll see you next time.